On this segment on the Western Wisconsin Journal focused on agriculture, we're talking with a newly appointed chair of the Assembly Committee on Agriculture. I'm Michelle Stangler, joined by Representative Travis Tranel. Travis, tell me a little bit about your background and how you got into this position.
Well, thank you, and good morning, Michelle. I appreciate the opportunity to be on. As you said, my name's Travis Tranel. I'm a state representative from the southern part of Wisconsin. I represent all of Grant County, parts of Iowa, Lafayette, Richland, and a little bit of Vernon County. I've been in the legislature. I got elected in 2010, so I'm currently starting the beginning of my 7th term. In my personal life outside of the legislature, I'm a dairy farmer. My family, we milk about 600 cows in southern Grant County. We farm about 2,500 acres, and I'm fortunate to be able to farm with my cousins and my uncle, my wife, my family. Just very much a family farm, and feel very appreciative that I've been able to continue farming throughout my tenure in the legislature. And as you indicated, I've been on the Assembly Committee on Agriculture the entire time that I've been in the body, but this will be the first term that I will chair that committee.
And as chair, you'll have the responsibility to leading the team. So what does this committee all entail?
Sure. So hopefully your viewers know that in Wisconsin, agriculture is a huge part of who we are. It's our 3rd largest industry. It's about a $105 billion industry. 435,000 jobs are directly or indirectly created because of agriculture. So whether you're a farmer or not, agriculture affects you in some capacity. And I think a lot of times, even people that live in Western Wisconsin or rural Wisconsin, we might not even realize, even though we live right in the heart of it, how much it affects us. So our committee really affects everybody, whether you're from Western Wisconsin, whether you're from a more urban or a city. We often remind people that even though you might not have a lot of agriculture in your district, you might not really associate your constituents with being directly affected by agriculture. Everybody eats, 100% of the population eats, and that's not going to change. So what we do affects everybody, whether they realize it or not, which makes it a very interesting and very important committee. The other interesting aspect of our committee is, as you well know, and hopefully your viewers know, agriculture has consolidated for decades now. And so we're getting to the point in society where very, very few people are actually directly involved in what we refer to as production agriculture. And production agriculture would be the farmers and the ranchers who are primarily responsible for feeding not only all of us, but also a lot of people throughout the world. Right now, some of your viewers may be interested to know roughly about 25% or 1/4 of the milk, just the milk that we produce in this state, is currently being exported to other countries. When I first got elected and first started farming in around the mid-2000s, I started farming 2005 on my own when my father was diagnosed with a cancer. At that time, we were basically neutral in terms of exports. Almost 100% of our production was being consumed domestically. And just within the last 15 to 20 years, now 25% of what we produce is being exported. So it's just a phenomenal story that agriculture has to tell. But where I was going with that is because fewer and fewer people are involved in agriculture and fewer people are farming, even though we've gotten a larger footprint in terms of where we're distributing all of our products, we obviously have a much smaller voice when it comes to the state capitol, because just as in society there are fewer and fewer farmers, there are fewer and fewer farmers in the legislature. So that means that those of us that are fortunate enough to yet still be farming and also be a member of the legislature, we have a responsibility to tell that story, tell it in a meaningful way, and tell it in a way where our colleagues still respect and know what needs to be done to support our industry.
And it's really neat on how you're dairy farming and you're also serving as a legislator. So how neat to have that connection while serving on the committee. What conversations are you having with your peers that are serving in legislators as well about agriculture?
Yeah, well, certainly every opportunity that we get, we remind them of the importance of what we do. I often tell people, you know, I love all industries. I love all segments of our economy, but agriculture is a little bit different in the sense of, we're not a value added product in the sense like entertainment or some industries where they may provide you with things that are very nice to have, but not necessarily 100% needed. What we do has to be done. People have to eat. Excuse me. And so because people have to eat, I think it's important that they pay attention to agriculture. They have to understand. I try to convey the pressure that agriculture is under. A lot of times, especially when I first started, there seemed to be more debate about the size of farms. I think, fortunately, we've now become to the point where we're starting to accept that farms can be of all different shapes and sizes and stripes and colors, and we need all of them. From the small guy milking 40 or 50 cows to the family farms that are milking more, to the corn and soybean growers, to the vegetable growers, to the cranberries. We have a wide variety of agriculture in our state, and whether they're big or small, whether they're diversified, whether they're just in one line of production, they're all very, very important. And my job and the conversations that I have, getting back to the heart of your question, is to convey the importance of that to my colleagues, and also to point out to them that they have agriculture in their district. I often remind the speaker, who is a good friend of mine, but our districts are vastly different. His is much more urban, a lot more population in a more dense area, where I'm obviously more rural, but he has a Case IH factory in his district. Well, guess who's buying all those tractors? My farmers are buying those tractors. And so whether people realize it or not, ag is in every single district. And a big part of my job is to make sure that other legislators understand that, and they understand that if things are going well in western and rural Wisconsin, chances are things will also go well where you live.
Now, serving as chair in this position, what have been some responsibilities or some things that you've done already, or something that you're looking forward to as well when serving throughout the chair of this committee?
Yeah, so like we said earlier, ag touches so many different aspects of rural Wisconsin. We're really trying to focus on just a few things and try to bring attention to a few things. Look where we might be able to make the highest impact. One thing that I've noticed already, just by being chair, I've had the opportunity to tell agriculture's story a lot more than I have in the past, which I really appreciate. Currently, the state of Wisconsin, we are in a pretty good fiscal position. We've had some pretty conservative budgets for well over the last decade, and that has put us in a very solid position, especially compared to Minnesota, which a lot of your viewers are probably quite familiar with. But moving forward, one of the things we want to focus on is there's an opportunity to understand that we're in a good position, and hopefully maybe return some of those dollars specifically to agriculture. There's also emerging markets, as you might be aware. A lot of times, I think when farmers start talking about global warming or carbon sequestration, they kind of gloss over because they're really not, I don't want to say they're not interested in it, but it's a whole level of complexity that they maybe don't want to have to deal with. And as a farmer, I can completely understand that. And right now, we're kind of in the Wild West in terms of credit trading, carbon sequestration. People understand that the federal government is going to invest a lot of money into these types of programs. So they realize that there's money to be made, and agriculture is going to be a huge part of that. So one of the things that we're looking at is, how can we as a state government, me as a chair of the Ag Committee, how can we help farmers understand these markets and facilitate these markets? And maybe even to some extent, could we have DATCAP help create these markets? Because right now, it's really debatable whether or not the markets even exist, and nobody really understands them. And farmers are so busy and wear so many different hats that I don't know that it's really fair for them to understand the complexities of carbon trading. And so maybe there's an opportunity for DATCAP to dive into that a little deeper and simplify it, and make a program where it's easy for everybody to understand. So that's another thing that we'll be focusing on this session quite extensively.
And to say the least, the carbon markets for myself personally, they've taken a lot of time to actually understand, a little over a year. And now I think I have a grasp on the market, but it'll probably change. Let's be real.
Yeah,
Another,
and I'm the same way. I mean, it's a lot to digest and it's a lot to understand, and there's a lot of money to be made, and that's what sort of concerns me, because anytime there's a lot of money to be made, people are going to be interested. And to your point, there's going to be people that understand this inside and out. And my concern is they're going to take advantage of agriculture and they're going to use it as an opportunity to make money off of agriculture, when I would like to see a large portion of those dollars be returned to the producers and the farmers themselves, because they're the ones that are actually implementing the processes that are going to help with our environment moving forward.
and to maybe our viewers who don't have an understanding of the carbon markets, can you break it down to what your understanding of it is, of this emerging market?
Yeah, so basically, the best way to describe it, I guess I would say, a bushel of corn currently is priced by the bushel, or milk, you sell it by the hundredweight. And so milk is milk, corn is corn, meat is meat. Because of our changing environment, now some companies are starting to say, well, we like your 100 pounds of milk and we like your bushel of corn, but how much energy went in to produce that? And they want to take that into consideration when they're pricing their product. There's also some industries that submit a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, and agriculture can capture a lot of that and put it back into the ground. So that's kind of what they call carbon sequestration. And they want to create a market, or they'll tell a farmer, hey, if you do this, we'll give you X amount of dollars. Well, the reality is they might be giving the farmer $10,000 and they should be giving them 15 or 20 or even more. Nobody really knows what the value of what the farmer is doing is generating on the back end. And so we want to create a market that's more transparent, so that the farmer understands, okay, somebody knocked on my door and said they're going to give me 15,000. And I understand that they're going to turn around and they're going to make 17 or 18,000 on the back end. So they're going to make $3,000 off of this. That seems reasonable. If they knock on your door and say, I'm going to give you 15,000, but they're going to turn around and sell $115,000 worth of credits, then they're making 100,000. The farmer's only making 15,000 and the farmer's doing all the work. I have a problem with that.
Yeah, and this is the whole movement to try to be net zero. Some companies have years in place like 2030, 2050. Do you think that's going to be possible?
I'm not sure, and I'm not going to comment whether it's possible or not. I just can tell that that's the direction that our economy is moving, and there's going to be a lot of money up for grabs. And so I think it's our responsibility to make sure that people don't take advantage of agriculture and farmers throughout this process.
And one ways where farmers are being more sustainable, you could say, I know that sometimes that could be a buzzword, is using conservation practices like no-till and cover crops. And I bet you've had a lot of conversations about how farmers can implement these, or just, some programs that the state legislation is supporting.
Well, yeah, and that's to your point, that's one of the things when you talk about agriculture telling its story. Originally, I think there were a lot of people that thought farmers would want to kind of gloss over and really not talk about conservation or sustainability. And I'm of the mindset, are you kidding me? I mean, we love to tell our story. If you're still farming in 2023, guess what? You're pretty good at conservation. You're pretty good at being sustainable. You survived when 98.5% of the rest of the population didn't, because there was a time when we were all farming because we didn't rely on anybody else to produce and grow our food. So farmers love to participate in conservation. I always say they're the best conservation people out there, because ultimately at the end of the day, what most farmers want to do is be able to hand their land down to the next generation. And so in order for that to be a viable and healthy environment, in order for it to be a sustainable business, we want that land to be as healthy as we possibly can. So conserving topsoil, making sure that the dollars that we put out there in terms of fertilizer, making sure that that fertilizer stays on the field, goes into the plant that we want it to go in, all of that it's not only to our environmental benefit, it's also to our economic benefit. And so I was on the speaker's task force for water quality. One of the things that came out of there was a continuing support for producer-led watershed groups, because what I know as a farmer and what we have been able to start to convey to my colleagues and to regulators, quite frankly, like the USDA, the DNR, and DATCAP, is that you can come up with all the best rules and regulations in the world, but if there is not buy-in from the farmers and the producers themselves, it's not really going to matter. And so what we've seen with these groups is when farmers implement these practices themselves, whether they're just experimenting or messing around, or they see that their neighbor is doing it and it seems to be working, they're a lot more likely to continue the practice and expand it much more quickly than anything that we could have done if we would have come to them as a big brother and said, you need to do this and here's why. And so the budget, we're going to continue to fund that, increase the funding a little bit. I'm a big believer in encouraging and promoting good behavior, as opposed to try to be the heavy hand of government to come in and say, you need to do this because I say it's the right thing to do.
For sure. And perhaps another conversation that's happening is land values. They continue to increase, and there's like hard to buy land and here in Wisconsin. So perhaps is there something in this committee that's trying to address the land values?
Man, I wish I had a better answer for you on that. It is a challenge. It's absolutely a challenge. It's been a challenge my whole life. Like I said, I've been farming for almost 20 years now, and in my entire time since I've been farming, land values have only continued to increase. And so getting into farming is definitely as challenging now as it's ever been. The one thing that I will say, there are producers out there who are very adamant that young people have a chance in farming. And so if you're a young person and you're interested in farming, there is a path. You can get into agriculture. Is it expensive? Yes. Are you going to need help? Absolutely. But that path does exist. And I don't think that we can understate that enough, especially when we're talking to young people. I do think there's also a responsibility for producers here as well. Oftentimes we want to turn to the government and we want the government to have all of the answers. As somebody who's been elected 7 times now, I can rightfully admit the government is not going to solve all of our problems. And so where I'm going with that is, if you are an operator who maybe is in their 50s or 60s and doesn't have a transition plan, or might not have any heirs who are interested in taking over your operation, you do have somewhat of a responsibility to bring in the next generation and get them going. You don't always have to sell your farm to the highest bidder. You don't always have to capture the greatest amount of value that you can get off of it. Sometimes you need to, and I understand that everybody's in a different financial position. But I do think as producers, to me, if I was in that situation, obviously you would need to capture the value that you've worked your whole life to get, but it would also mean something to me to make sure that my farm lives on for, another generation. And you do hear those stories where producers do get linked up with people that didn't have a family farm to start with, and oftentimes those are very successful transitions. So do I have a solution to the increasing value of ag land? Honestly, no, not really. One of the things we are working on this session, I alluded to earlier, was a tax credit, recognizing that farmland itself gets use value assessment, which is very important for Wisconsin farmers, and we don't want to do anything to change that. But they are not given that same tax status when it comes to their buildings and to their infrastructure, and extending that same type of benefit to the actual buildings and infrastructure that are used in farming is one way that could potentially help farmers be able to afford ever increasing high value dollar land.
So there are many issues and things you're working on in the state's capital in Madison. What are some good things, some positives that have really come about during your many years in the Wisconsin state legislation?
Oh, sure. Well, First off, I would say in general, we've accomplished as a government and as a state, we accomplished way more than I think people ever realize. Uh, it seems like a lot of times the media likes to focus maybe on where we disagree, and we certainly have some very high profile disagreements. But more times than not, we get along. You would have to do the math or look it up, but I believe over 90% of all legislation that gets passed has bipartisan support. And so just looking at where we were as a state before I got elected and where we're at now, when I got elected, our state had a $3.5 billion budget deficit. We actually owed the state of Minnesota hundreds of millions of dollars because of tuition reciprocity agreements that we failed to pay on. We had a dim job outlook. There weren't enough jobs. There were too many people on unemployment. Our schools needed more funding. Today, we are funding our schools at record levels, always looking to do more. They always tell us they need more, but our budget situation is completely reversed. We have a $7 billion roughly budget surplus. A lot of that's one-time money, so I often caution people not to get as excited as they want to seem to get, because believe me, when people think you have a $7 billion budget surplus, we have people in our office every day that are asking for 10 million for this, 20 million for that, 100 million for this. I don't know how many times we could spend $7 billion, but it's more than once. But the moral of the story is we are in a much better fiscal position today than we were when I first got elected in 2010, which puts us in a position to make more significant investments moving forward. We constantly have to remind ourselves, and we have to understand, you guys live right next to a border, so you understand that states compete, and we are constantly looking at, okay, where in the country are states doing things better than we're doing? Why would somebody want to live in a different state versus Wisconsin? We have to be aware of that. We have to compete for people just like businesses have to compete for consumers. And so being in a strong fiscal position allows us the opportunity to keep our tax burden low, to make sure that businesses want to come to Wisconsin, to make sure that they want to do business in Wisconsin. And if we do that, then we can keep our economy growing, which means we can continue to lower and lower taxes, which we've been able to do throughout my 7 terms, while continuing to increase the amount of money that we have as a state. So we're doing lots of good things and always looking forward to doing more.
Well, thanks for coming on here. We appreciate your time. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we close?
No, Michelle, I'd just like to, again, thank you guys for covering agriculture. Anytime I get a reporter who is willing to talk agriculture, I just want to let them know that we appreciate it, because I think a lot of people, if they get the chance to drive out to the countryside and see a farm, I think they're interested, but I don't think they necessarily understand what's going on out there. And so when we can kind of explain the complexities of how we're feeding the rest of the world, that's a great opportunity, and we appreciate you giving us that opportunity.
Well, thanks for coming on. Recently appointed chair of the Assembly Committee on Agriculture, Representative Travis Tranel. Appreciate your time and all you do to serve Wisconsin's agriculture. Thanks for tuning in to this segment on agriculture on the Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Michelle Stangler.